There were stories that I couldn't put in the book. A story had to earn their way into the book. It had to be something unusual. It couldn't just be perfunctory kind of thing because it had to have a little twist to it and had to have some importance to get in the book. And when I organized the book, I decided that I wanted to have some of the best stories at the very beginning, and then the best stories in the center, and then as the last story in the book, I call it's going to be the last story in the book because we want the reader to finish up and say, wow. And your story is a wow story. And so it's the last one.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Authors on Mission podcast. So I'm going to take you back today to 1953, and over 1,000 young men from across America walked through the gates of Naval Academy with dreams as vast as the ocean itself. 4 years later, 848 of them graduate, not knowing if they're about to scatter across the globe and literally reshape the world. One would put footprints on the moon, another would architect the GPS system in your pocket right now, others would survive hijackings, endure years in enemy prison camps, and referee Super Bowls. Now, on today's episode, I'm honored to speak with James D. Paulk, Jr., Naval Academy Class of 1957, who has collected his classmates' most incredible stories in his new book, Shaking Up the World. Jim is an incredible author. He's a submarine officer turned P&G executive, turned marine conservatist, turned storyteller, and he's just getting started. So I'm excited to chat with you. We're going to talk about all the stories that will make you believe that truth really is stranger than fiction. Jim, welcome to the Authors on Mission podcast.
Thank you very much, Danielle. I'm very excited to be here and talk with you this morning.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
I'm very excited too. It's going to be an incredible show, and you really do have a ton of wonderful stories to tell. I'm going to just have to start off by asking, you've lived through so many incredible changes and events throughout your life. I'm wondering if there's a particular change in our country that surprised you the most throughout all of your experiences. A little bit of a ballpark question there, but I'm kind of curious.
Well, we were talking about my classmates. You mentioned 1953 and June the 29th, and it took me 3 years to get into the academy. And everyone was there. It was their dream. And many had waited a long time, as I had, to get in. And so the first night we were running around, where are you from? What do you do? And we had no responsibilities that night. And it seemed like everyone I met had graduated valedictorian, were president of the class, and captain of the football team. And I'm thinking, I'm none of those things. So here we are, all these years later. I'm more in awe of them today than I was then. I think the royalties from my book go back to the foundation, and we sponsor a professor in the history department at Naval Heritage. So I don't get any money out of this. Make sure I understand that. But the best thing I got out of this, doing this book, which was basically a year of my time, was getting to know people I didn't know before and learning stories I didn't know anything about. So it has been, and it still is, a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. I know I'm working at it full time now and doing everything we can to market the book because I'd like everybody in the world to know about these things. You mentioned the GPS and Brad Parkinson. Well, we're trying to get a building on the yard, we call our campus the yard. to get a building named for him because that was monumental, the GPS
course.
system. And I mean, when you want, we could go into a lot more details about Brad because I could talk about Brad a lot. But what he's done is almost like discovering electricity, and the process he went through was unbelievable. But
Right.
to have my classmates that went through all of these different experiences, and it's just unbelievable. And one editor called this book History at Eye Level because it covered a lot of events over the latter half of the 20th century. And if you look at one of the reviews on Amazon, it is anonymous military historian and teacher. And it's a long, very, very deliberate professional review that's on there for people to read. And there are 3 editorial reviews at a different location on there so people can learn a little bit more. But I am so in awe of my classmates, and that's why I decided to do this book because I wanted to share this with everyone. And hopefully we're doing that. And you're helping us, and I appreciate it.
Of course. And I think it's just incredible that you've taken on this endeavor to shine a light on the incredible things that they've all accomplished. So I'm curious to know about a little bit of the process of this. Did you interview each of your classmates during the process of writing the book, or was it a little bit of research involved? What was the process for creating it?
Well, one of the things I've done, I've been a leader in many organizations over the years, and I always know that I am probably the least important person in the group. So I formed a review committee to help me in this process because I knew that I couldn't do it all. And I have 7 men, I have 1 woman, and she's probably smarter than all of us. She's retired from the Smithsonian, and she helped us a lot with the book. But that's what I did is put together a review committee. And the process was if if a classmate was alive, when I got through editing that chapter, I would send it to them and ask them to check it for accuracy and also edit it any way they wanted to. But if the classmate was not alive, I sent it to one of the members of the review committee, sometimes 2 of them, to get it all. And I could tell some stories about that, but it was a wonderful, wonderful process for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'll tell you one story. Charlie Duke, who spent 3 days on the moon, that's the longest time anyone's ever spent on the moon. And in fact, Charlie was the communicator for Apollo 11, which is the first trip to the moon. And Armstrong asked him to be the communicator. He was the person he wanted to talk to. So Charlie was at NASA and he was a communicator. He was supposed to be the backup crew for Apollo 13, but he got the measles. And Ken Mattingly had never had the measles, so he couldn't go on Apollo 13. But Ken Mattingly went with Charlie. And for Charlie's story, he asked me, he said, Jimmy, he said, I want you to interview me and then you write the story. And I said, okay. I said, we can do that. So we set up an appointment and I asked my 31-year-old granddaughter, Melanie Johnson, to come over. I said, we'll both take a set of notes and we'll make sure we cover everything. So the 3 of us talked, and it was doing it with Melanie, one of my granddaughters. And I have 3 granddaughters, and I call them the blonde team. You could be on the blonde team too. But Melanie helped me. And when we got through with the notes, I combined those into the story and sent it to Charlie. And Charlie embellished it, of course, and added a little bit to it, but pretty much like what we had written. And he sent me a whole stack of photos from NASA. And I picked out 10 of them to go into the book. And the one that I like the best is the one with him saluting the American flag with the lander in the background. And that's good. But Charlie got permission to take 2 other things on the trip. He took a photograph of his family and had it in a Ziploc, and he left that there on the moon, his family.
Oh, wow.
And it was also the 25th anniversary of the Air Force. And so he had two medallions he took. He left one on the moon and he took one back that's now in a museum, the Air Force Museum. So the other thing that's in the book about his story is that the Olympics were going on at the same time. And they decided that why don't we do an Olympics on the moon? So Charlie said, that's a great idea. So Charlie, you can't really run on the moon, you kind of hop. And so he went into hop, 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 and he jumped. And when he was in the air, he realized that if I land on my back, I'm probably dead because it's going to break my backpack where he had the air conditioning, the oxygen system under his spacesuit. So he turned on his side and landed on his side. And when he landed, Ken said, Charlie, that wasn't too smart. And then NASA came on the phone and said, no more. So years later, the Olympic Committee sent them a certificate recognizing their participation in the Olympics on the moon. And they put that in the museum too. So that was really a fun story. And I just give you a little background and stuff with it. But it's a great read because there are things in here you wouldn't imagine. When they left the moon and they were going to get hooked up with the orbiter again, and they got connected and they opened the door and dust started coming up because they had dust on their shoes and on uniform. So they got handed down a vacuum and said, get it cleaned up. You're not coming in here until you get cleaned up, get rid of all this dust. You're not bringing the dust into the orbiter. So they took the vacuum and they vacuumed themselves, they vacuumed the whole compartment, and then they went up into the orbiter and then they came back to Earth. But that's a fun story, and I think it would make a great movie. There are probably 4 or 5 stories in this book that would make a great movie. And I think that's one of them that would be, it's a fun read. All these stories are fun reads. There are over 80 stories in the book, and there are 59 authors of
Oh,
stories. So we don't have one author. I'm best, they title me compiler. So publishers are compiler on the book. I said, I've never been called a compiler. I'm actually an author because I did some stories in the book, but that was kind of fun that they did that. But anyway, there are a lot of people involved in doing this book. And when I told my classmates that I'm going to do a book of stories about us because it's too important to let these things go and be forgotten. And no one said, who the heck are you to do stories? Who are you? You're not top leader in our class. I was one of the leaders, but I think everybody's a leader that goes to Annapolis. But everybody cooperated, and Bob McElwee called me like right away, and he said, Jimmy, he said, do you want some stories from the NFL in the book? I said, absolutely. I want stories in the NFL. He said, okay, I'll send you some. So he sent me some great stories. He served as a white hat, the referee, and he was official in NFL for 27 years. And he did 3 Super Bowls in 3 different decades, and the only NFL official to ever do that. So when he retired, I think he was probably the senior official in the NFL. Now, I will tell you one story. He said, as a referee, I stand behind the quarterback. And he said, when the play starts, the only thing I watch is the quarterback. I don't know if a pass has been completed, if a running back was tackled. I don't know if it's a touchdown. I don't know anything. I just watch the quarterback until he goes to the ground to make sure that it was a legal tackle or it was not a ball was not hit, and whatever happened there with the passer. But he said there were some things I had to do before the play started. He said I had to check the game clock. I had to check the play clock. I had to check the formation. I checked substitutions. And he said if I was in Chicago, I had to do one other thing. I had to reach around my back pocket and check to see if my penalty flag was there. If it was not there, he said, I would go to the huddle. I would stand behind number 34 and I would say, Peyton, give me my flag back. And Peyton would reach under his jersey, pull it out, and hand it to him. No one in the stands or on television ever saw that. Of course, the guys in the huddle were all laughing, you know.
Right.
So, Walter, probably don't know Walter Payton. Do
No,
you
I'm
know
not
that
too
name?
familiar.
He was nicknamed Sweetness, and he was probably one of the best running backs ever in the NFL. And he liked to have fun playing football, and he did shenanigans like stealing the flag and doing other things. And there are a number of stories in here from Bob McElwee. There's a photograph in the book with him with his arms up signifying touchdown, and that's kind of a great photograph. But Bob was did a great job, and there's a lot of fun stories in there that he's sharing with us, and those are good stories that need to get remembered.
You really do have a fascinating treasure chest of all of these stories. It's so wonderful that you've been able to clearly compile all of these. I didn't realize you actually didn't write them, that you had others write them and you organize them. That's very interesting for the authors listening to the show right now because, we usually offer writing tips, but this is a whole nother type of storytelling, is gathering the stories and organizing them and deciding which ones to include. So I'm wondering, how did you choose which stories to tell, which not to tell? Was there a certain method?
Well, that's a great question because it was real, and we had to deal with that. There were stories that I couldn't put in the book. A story had to earn their way into the book. It had to be something unusual. It couldn't just be perfunctory kind of thing because it had to have a little twist to it and had to have some importance to get in the book. And when I organized the book, I decided that I wanted to have great, the best stories, some of the best stories at the very beginning, and then more good, the best stories in the center, and then at the end. And the last story in the book, I called his name was Bob Welburn, and I called Bob and I said, Bob, we have decided that your story is going to have a position of honor in the book. It's going to be the last story in the book because we want the reader to finish up and say, wow. And your story is a wow story. And so it's the last one. And he thanked me for that honor. So we did a lot of thinking about where we were going to position stories. And I had to tell some people that story wasn't going to fit. Some people submitted multiple stories, and it was easy to say, well, I'll take three of them, but I won't take two. There had to be a decision there because you want to end up with a really quality book. And I had done a book before this one, and I had the same attitude with that book, that the stories had to earn their way into the book. And it's mostly about other people. And that's what my desire was, to talk about others. It's not about me. It's about others. It's about my class and their accomplishments. And it's not really accomplishments. Some of them are just events that occurred in one day, others over a period of weeks, and some over a period of years. And I can tell you one of my favorite stories in here is really, I would say it's it's a fairy tale. And I think every book needs a fairy tale. And this one is about a young man by the name of Bruce DeMars. Bruce was an assistant janitor at a bank in Chicago. He was from a very poor neighborhood. He had absolutely no future, absolutely none. His family couldn't afford anything. But the bankers took a liking to him, and he had mentioned to him that his big dream in life was to go to Annapolis. So someone owed them a favor, and he got into Annapolis. And when he arrived the day before the induction, he had traveled all night, and the hospital corpsman that checked him said your blood pressure's too high. He said, but you look like you're exhausted. And go over there on the couch and lie down for a couple hours and get some sleep, and then I'll recheck it. So in a couple hours, he woke him up and he checked his blood pressure and he said, "Okay, Red, you're good to go." So he got into Annapolis because that corpsman allowed him to get some rest and recheck his blood pressure. Now, he graduated, he went into submarines, and he went into the nuclear program. And he advanced up through the ranks, and he became a 4-star admiral, one of the top admirals in the Navy. He was a director of nuclear power systems, who was a father of the nuclear program. But the story is not about making admiral and all the things he did. I didn't mention anything that he accomplished because the story was janitor to admiral. Now, when I sent the story back to him, he didn't reply. And so I sent him a note: "Bruce, have you had a chance to read your story yet? Have you had a chance to read it?" I didn't get it. Eventually, I got a phone call from his son. He said, "Jim," he said, "Dad has not been doing very good lately." But I read the story to him. And when I got done, he looked up at me from the bed and he said, "I want to buy that book." So he liked the story. And unfortunately, he died a couple of weeks after that, but at least he got to hear his story and he liked the story in his book. So that was a little caveat there on that story. But I love to tell that story. But there's so many stories in here that I like to tell.
Yeah, I can see that because every one of them is important and needs to be shared. And thank you for sharing that one, for example. That was very touching to know that he was able to see it too and experience it and see his story on the pages, which is a huge mark of legacy for sure. So I'm curious, I'm seeing also the pages, the front cover right behind you there, the printed book. I'm curious to know about the cover design. Did you pick out that image yourself?
You know what? That was on the cover of Shipmate magazine that came to me in the mail. Shipmate is the alumni magazine that we get every other month now. It used to be monthly. And I saw that and I said, "That's got to be the cover of my book." The next day, I got a call from my roommate who spent 30 years in the Marine Corps. Earl said, "Jimmy," he said, "it's got Shipmate." He said, "That cover has got to be on the book." I said, "That's exactly where I am. It belongs there." And I said, "We need to find the genesis of it." And so our Earl helped me do that. The young man on the cover is leaving Bancroft Hall. He's just been commissioned as second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. His mother contracted the photographer to take his picture, and she's on the steps of Memorial Hall in Bancroft Hall, and that's going out the door. He's going out into the world. So I got permission from Shipmate magazine and from the photographer and from the mother, and all of them got copies of the book. But that was the genesis of that cover because here's a young man that's going out into the world and beginning his career. And we thought it was just so appropriate to show that because it's so significant.
Yeah, of course. And it is a beautiful cover too. And I'm really glad that there's a wonderful story behind it. It goes to show that it was just fate, that it all fell into place like that. So I'm wondering now, if you have this book out, I'm wondering what's next on the agenda. Are you considering perhaps writing any other books or continuing with your, writing at all? What's next on the list?
Well, I'm thinking about another book, and I've actually started on it, but it got put on the back burner because of all this marketing and everything that we're doing. But it was going to be how I met my wife or how I met my husband, and then maybe how I met you because it could be a friend. And I've actually got 31 stories on that. So if anyone wants to get in the book, please send me your story. I'd love to have it. But it's going to be a book about love and relationships. And in my first book, which is mostly fiction adventure stories, uh, my love story is in there. And a lot of reviews, people like my love story. And so I think there's always room for more to talk about love and relationships, because I don't know anything more important than that. To me, that's number one in the world. And I think that's all throughout this second book, all about relationships and what we did and things we did together and things we accomplished together. But yeah, I hope I can do that book before I'm gone. And I wanted to get it out this year, but I don't know whether I will or not. But I may. Like I said, I've got 31 good stories, and there's some of them are so funny, and there are a few of them in here that the first marriage didn't work out, and they just cover that briefly, but they found love in the second story, and it's great. And the way people met, is unbelievable. And it's how I met my wife. It was unbelievable. My girlfriend from Georgia decided to send me twice a year, and a few days a year wasn't much of a relationship. So that ended. And I always had girlfriend from my sophomore year in high school. I stayed a steady girl I went with for 2 years. And so a classmate invited me to go to the University of Delaware for a 3-day weekend. And he got his girlfriend at the time, Sheila Cunningham, fixed me up with 3 blind dates. And I'm sure that number 1 and 2 were okay, but number 3, she was unbelievable. She had an aura about her. I never met anyone like her. She almost like glowed in the dark to me. And I got stabbed in the heart. And I said, wow, she was something. But I tried to get her to come down to Annapolis. Our letters and telephone calls, and she wasn't interested in a military relationship. But I finally convinced her to come down. We were having a formal dance, and found out later she loved to dance. And so she came down, and we agreed to meet on the steps of Bancroft Hall at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. I wasn't sure I was going to recognize her, and she had the same problem. But there she was with a sweatshirt with Delaware across the front. So, so we both smiled, and that became a good relationship. But I'd heard that I later found out that she'd just broken up with the captain of the Delaware basketball team. She was the most popular girl on the campus. I didn't know that. I just knew that she was absolutely gorgeous, and more inside, gorgeous inside and out. She was unreal. And we had a wonderful 60-year relationship before I lost her. But I love to tell that story. She was so special. And I think she could run president of the United States if she'd want to, but she's not interested in politics. But she was a leader of almost every group that she was in, and not because she sought it out. It was people always just wanted her to be the leader. And she had the natural ability just to do it and get things done and get cooperation for people. She was a natural leader, and wonderful, wonderful leader, and a wonderful mother and a wonderful grandmother. And I wish she were here now that we're having great grandchildren. But anyway, I miss her a lot. But I want to do this other book if I can.
You really should. And well, first off, thank you for sharing that beautiful story of, meeting your wife. I always love hearing these stories too. So that's exactly why I think that this book would be another huge hit, because first off, everyone loves to tell their story. I'm sure they would love to send you theirs. It would be a big job for you to decide again which ones to include and which not, like you talked about before. But it would have a big impact on anybody reading it. It would be very touching for sure. That being said, then, how can people get in touch with you if they want to send you their stories, or they want to learn a little bit more about shaking up the world, or just to connect? Do you have a website, a certain email address?
We started a website, which that was just too much work for me. But I do Facebook. I have a Jim Paulk page, and I also have a James D. Paulk Jr. author page. So I have 2 pages, and those are pretty easy. And my email is jimdpaulk@yahoo.com. That's pretty easy to remember too. Jim D. Paulk, PAULK.com. And I'd love to hear people. I love to interact with people. And we have fun on our Facebook sites. We put everything in there. Rachel and I actually did a tutorial wacky rig worms bass fishing. You believe that? She did a wonderful job, and I did demonstration. I had a little table set up on the dock with all the
Wow.
stuff on it, and we went through it. And I talked about tie a hook and how to put the rings on the worm and how to hook it, and then we demonstrated catching bass. So I think we had about 10 or 12. You can only have like 60 seconds on an iPhone at a time, but we did about a dozen of those, and we're going to actually try and make a YouTube out of it if I can find somebody to do it. I've got somebody, but they haven't had time yet, but we'll do that. But yeah, that's fun. I've enjoyed doing that, and I got a million stories I could tell. I mean, my best friend from elementary school, and we're still buddies and still talk on phone just like we did when we were kids. And he said, Jimmy, he said, you've been organizing us and telling stories since we were in elementary school. And I think that's a handicap. I got a million friends, and I just love every one of them, and I love their stories. And I could tell some more stories if you were interested in them too.
I would love to. I think maybe you should come on again sometime to our podcast. You can share more about the stories on the next episode. I think people would really love to hear about that. I'm wondering if you happen to have any last bits of advice, or especially writing tips for the authors listening today, because you do have a ton of stories and experiences. What can people take away with them today that can be learned from your experience here with the
I
books?
I think the hardest thing for an author is to pick up the pen and write. And I would say, I tell people, just take notes. When you think of something, write it down. You can always come back later and finish the story. But if you got a thought, write it down. For me, it's easier to do to on with a pen and then type it into the computer rather than think and type at the same time. If you're a good typer, you might be able to do it. But I think my advice for an author is to start. I think the hardest thing is to start.
Mm.
And the best thing to do is not worry about organization, not worry about sentence structure or spelling or anything. Just write and write and write and get a beginning to it. I had a story one time that I did. There was a lot in the news about breaking the largemouth bass record, which went back to 1932. It was caught by a man named George Washington Perry. And so I kept seeing that name, and I said, that can't be the George Perry that I knew when I was a kid. So I called my best friend. I said, Mike, is this George Perry? Did he catch a world record bass? He said, yes, he did. I said, oh my word. He was the most unusual character I ever knew. And so I started doing research, and I did about 9 months, and I had a stack of notes. And then I felt intimidated to write that story. I said, this is too important for me to write since I'm a poor writer and somebody. So I called Pete Thomas, who was the outdoor editor for the LA Times and maybe one of the best in the country. I said, Pete, I got all these notes. I said, but I'm not good enough writer. You are the best outdoor writer in the country. You should write the story. But he said, Jimmy, I've been reading some of your stories in the fishing magazine and you're getting better. I said that ain't much of a compliment. But anyway, I finally got enough confidence to spread all these notes out on the dining room table. And I got them organized and I started writing and I wrote it out and I handed it to my wife, Pat, and I said, what do you think? And she read it. She said, it's awful. I said, yeah, I know it's awful, but it's on paper and now we can edit it now. And we did about 10 or 12 edits on it and got it decent enough. And it was published in 4 magazines and newspapers. And we did a lot of interviews as a result of it. But at least we let people know that this guy that was more than just a name in a record book, he was a character. And for a kid to know a man like that, we didn't know he was famous or anything. It was like he called me Frogskin. Like, Frogskin, get out of here. You're going to get in trouble. But he was involved and doing a lot of stuff. And he really interacted with kids. And back in my day, adults ignored us. But that was probably good because we could do whatever we wanted. but he interacted with us as children. And then I had some other experiences with him, which I put in the story and in the book. And we actually ended up doing a book on him. And the editor used my title of my story. He said, "Can I use your title?" And the title was "Remembering George Perry." And he did a whole book, and we arranged it for him to interview other people that knew him. So we wanted people to know him. And you know what? That record is still in existence today. A Japanese angler tied the record, but it's still there from 1932. So isn't that fun?
That is. No, that's incredible. And I thank you so much for sharing that advice with us too. Just the idea of getting started, reaching out to others for help, and then you have those connections to, cherish after the fact too and before. Really cool story there. You really are filled with so many stories to tell. I would love to have you back on the show sometime to continue sharing these stories. I think it's important that people hear about them because it's all about legacy at the end of the day. When you write a book, there's many different reasons for doing it. Maybe you want to promote a brand or tell a story, but mainly it's legacy, having something there to share with others. So yeah, we'd love to have you back on and continue on for another time.
Well,
That'd be great.
I'd love to do that. I
Yeah.
like to talk. I got one time in high school, my math teacher told me to take my desk and go sit in the hall because I always talking. So I'm sitting in the hall at the end of the hall, and all of a sudden, a door way down the other end opened up, and Miss Macon, who had taught my mother and father and all my aunts and uncles, came out. And I said, "Oh my word, she's coming this way. Oh well, Lord, she's gonna see me there." I said, "At the hall." And she came down there. I said, "Oh Lord, there she is." And then she said, "Jimmy, what are you doing sitting out here in the hall?" I said, "Well, Miss Macon, Miss Tracy kicked me out of the room." And Miss Megan said, "Well, let's not let that happen again." I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she turned around, went back in the room. And senior year, of course, she had me in her homeroom, keep an eye on me. But she was my mentor for years. And after I got married and came back to Brunswick, Georgia, I took my wife. I said, "You got to meet Miss Macon," because we corresponded even while I was at the academy, and she had the most beautiful penmanship. But and she retired a couple of years after I got home. But I love Miss Macon, and I would tell authors, have a mentor like that. I mean, she motivated me. I mean, here's a person that was pretty average, and I wasn't a big honor roll student or anything like that. I was just somebody that was involved in doing things and organizing, and I did that all my life. It's like I went from one project to another, and because that's just the way I am, and it's fun. But I do have a problem with talking. I talk too much.
It's a good thing though. It's a good thing, especially for, a writer or a story compiler like yourself, right? You need to be able to talk and share those stories with others. And thank you so much for coming on the show and doing the same today. It's really been an incredible episode, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of it. It's really incredible what you've done here. It's a testament to what happens when, dedication and service and courage just ripple out across decades. So, thank you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had a good time.
Of course. And to all of our listeners, if Jim's journey has inspired you, just remember that every expert was once a beginner, every leader was once a follower, and every author was once someone with a story to tell. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to recognize that you too have the power to shake up the world. So you can find Shake Up the World on Amazon. We're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today, so you can go ahead and click on over, along with links to get in touch with Jim as well, as he shared earlier today. So until next time, this is the Authors on a Mission podcast, reminding you that your story matters, your mission awaits, and the world is ready to be shaken up by what you have to offer. We'll see you next time, everybody.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.